You ever have one of those Saturdays where you get home early from a business trip expecting the house to be empty, and instead it's just quiet? The kind of quiet that feels less like peace and more like a held breath. The sun was a low, rusty blur over Sharpsburg, and I was pulling into the garage, already feeling the two-day meeting at ABC Industries clinging to my skin like a cheap suit. My boss, bless his clueless heart, had insisted I, a systems analyst, attend a regional management retreat. The man can't even open a PDF, but he can organize a meeting, go figure. I told Lisa I'd be back Monday, giving myself some space to breathe. A good husband, right? Taking a couple of extra days just to decompress after a grueling business trip? If only that were the full truth. The real reason? I was dealing with a crisis of my own, a personal one, the kind that makes you go through all the stages of grief at once, but without the benefit of a funeral. I spent the evening doing pointless things, showering, changing into jeans, eating leftover spaghetti and a beer, all just to kill time. The house was exactly as I'd left it, too clean, too perfect, a staged crime scene waiting for a body. After midnight, I was still just there. The silence was thick, pressing in on me. It was in the air, a scent like ozone before a storm, and I could practically hear it humming. I knew what I had to do, but every fiber of my being wanted to procrastinate. Finally, I grabbed my light jacket, walked toward the side door, and then stopped. A flicker of something in my mind. A thought I'd almost forgotten. I went back to the living room, sat down at my laptop, and composed a quick email. One last loose end to tie up before the show began. 5 minutes later, I was gone. The garage door sealed shut behind me like a vault, locking in the ghost of a man who used to call that house home. The next morning, a call came in to Sharpsburg's emergency operator. A panicked female voice described an empty car in George Washington Park. The doors were open, the lights were on, and there was a lot of blood. A lot of blood. And that's the thing about messes, the ones you make, the ones that find you. You can try to clean them up, but the stains always remain. The news dropped like a rock in a still pond, and the ripples just kept coming. I was at a cheap motel on the outskirts of Hagerstown, nursing a lukewarm coffee and watching the morning show. They were talking about a missing man, a local business professional, and a car with a lot of blood. They showed a photo, my photo, a corporate headshot that made me look like a well-fed ghost. The whole thing was a bad joke, a real bummer. The anchors were grim, their voices full of manufactured sympathy, and I could almost hear the police scanners humming in the background. My phone, the one with the anonymous prepaid SIM, started to buzz with alerts. My face was everywhere, my name, the description of my car, the one I'd left in the park.
Mark Evans, 47, systems analyst, missing. I almost laughed. Missing? I was sitting there, very much present. They were weaving a story, and I was just the main character, a tragic figure in a drama I'd written myself. This was the part where the narrative shifts, where the world starts to catch up to the lie. It was a hell of a feeling, a mix of cold dread and a weird sort of victory. It felt like I was watching my own life unfold on a screen, and the director was finally getting to the good part. The cops were calling it a person of interest case, which was a nice way of saying they had no clue. They mentioned my wife, Lisa, who they said was distraught and cooperating fully. That part almost got me. Lisa, distraught? The woman could win an Oscar for that performance. I could practically see her, dabbing her eyes with a perfectly folded tissue, her voice quivering just enough to sound genuine. What a mess. The local cops were good, but not great. They were following the obvious trail, the one I'd laid out for them with a surgeon's precision. They were looking for a victim, a suspect, a motive. They weren't looking for a man in a motel room, watching their show, sipping his coffee, and waiting for the next act to begin. They couldn't see the real game, the chess match with a queen who thought she was a genius. The truth was hiding in plain sight, a symbolic image of what was really happening. My old life bled out and abandoned in a public park for everyone to see. And I knew with an icy certainty that the first person they'd go looking for after me would be the one I'd left a trail of breadcrumbs leading to, someone with a motive far more compelling than my own, a motive that was now becoming a matter of public record. It wasn't a secret, not really. Cops are predictable. You give them a bloody crime scene and a missing person, and they go straight to the nearest and dearest, the wife. So it was no surprise when the news started showing grainy footage of two detectives walking up the steps to my old house. The whole thing was a ballet of clichés. One guy, tall and lanky, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, that was Nesbitt. The other, stocky, with a frown permanently etched on his face, was Klein. The dynamic duo. They probably watched too many Netflix cop shows. My bet was on Nesbitt being the good cop, and Klein the one who was sick of everyone's BS. I could almost hear the questions they were asking Lisa, see her feigning concern. Did you love your husband? When was the last time you saw him? Did you two fight? She'd be a perfect picture of grief, a masterpiece of lies. But I knew something they didn't. They were looking at a carefully constructed narrative, a house of cards I'd built for them. They'd find the tracker in her car, the one I'd put there a year ago, just in case she decided to take an impromptu trip to Blake's house or to a nice restaurant he frequented. Just in case her late nights at the office were a little too late and a little too often. It was a nice piece of tech. A little paranoid maybe, but hey, you can't be too careful these days, can you? I felt a pang of something close to amusement, like watching a particularly dumb sitcom. They were wasting their time asking Lisa questions. The real answers weren't in her sad eyes or her trembling voice. They were in the digital breadcrumbs, the electronic trail I'd laid out for them with surgical precision. The staged emails, the fake bank transfers to a non-existent shell company, the carefully planted burner phone in a dumpster miles away. All of it leading them away from me and straight to her and to him. It was a beautiful, ugly thing. The detectives would find a few more pieces of the puzzle over the next couple of days, things I knew were waiting for them. And as they put those pieces together, their focus would shift from missing person to something else entirely. Something with more weight, more finality. The only thing they couldn't see was the look on my face as I watched it all unfold from a safe distance. The cold, triumphant grin of a man who'd just started his new life by ending his old one. The rain was a cold, steady rhythm against the motel window, a perfect soundtrack for the slow-motion car crash that was unfolding on the local news. The anchors in their practiced solemnity had moved on from missing man to suspicious circumstances. Nesbitt and Klein were now outside a high-end office building downtown, the headquarters of Blake's firm. Blake, my wife's boss, and more recently, her late-night work partner. He was a real piece of work, slick with a self-satisfied smirk that I'd seen on more than one of my wife's selfies. The kind of guy who thought he was smarter than everyone else. They'd found the paper trail I'd so carefully laid out for them. The shell company, the fake invoice for consulting services, the burner phone with a history of calls and texts to Blake. It all looked bad. Really, really bad. The kind of bad that makes a detective's eyes light up with dollar signs and promotion possibilities. I knew they'd find a connection to me, a digital fingerprint here and there, but it would all point back to one narrative, that Blake was secretly managing my finances and that something had gone terribly wrong. A classic tale of greed and betrayal, with the added bonus of my wife's involvement. I felt a surge of satisfaction so pure it almost made me laugh. The irony of it all was beautiful. They were so busy chasing the lie I'd given them, they wouldn't even see the truth until it hit them in the face. They were now in a game of my making, and they were playing right into my hands. The police, the media, my wife, even Blake, they all thought they were in control. But they were just actors on a stage I'd built for them. The rain outside intensified, a dark, cleansing flood washing away the city's sins.
A symbolic gesture, perhaps, or just a coincidence. I had no idea, and frankly, I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that the game had begun. My old life was gone, and I was free. Free from the lies, the deceit, and the constant feeling that I was living someone else's life. The only thing left to do was to watch the show unfold and wait for the credits to roll. The noose was tightening, and I felt nothing but a cold sense of satisfaction. The news cycle was a hungry beast, and it had a new favorite meal, Blake Moore, the successful businessman with a secret life. The media was now showing his face alongside mine, and they were talking about insider trading, embezzled funds, and a motive for murder. It was all a complete fabrication, of course, a masterpiece of misdirection, but it was also a story that sold, a perfect storm of greed, sex, and betrayal. The kind of thing that makes people lean in a little closer to their TVs. I knew they'd find the murder weapon next, the one I'd left for them in a storm drain 2 blocks from my old house. A cheap .22 caliber pistol I'd bought online from a guy in Arizona. It had no registration, no paper trail, nothing. But I'd made sure it had something better. A single fingerprint, a perfectly placed partial that would point directly to Blake. He was a firearms enthusiast, a fact I'd discovered during one of our few awkward coffee dates. He'd once showed me a whole online collection he was building, a little detail I tucked away for a rainy day. Well, it was pouring now. The cops would run the prints, and the conclusion would be inescapable. Blake was the culprit. It was all so simple, so elegant. I wasn't just faking my death. I was framing him. And not just him, but also my wife. They were in this together. They were the perfect pair of villains, and I was the tragic hero who had to fall for the plot to make sense. I could almost hear the click of the handcuffs, see the look on Blake's face as they read him his rights. It would be a moment of pure, unadulterated terror. He'd probably try to confess to the affair, hoping to get a plea deal for the lesser crime. But it would be too late. The evidence, the blood, the gun, it all pointed to one conclusion, a narrative so strong that no amount of protest would be able to break it. The truth in this case was irrelevant. The story was everything.
The media was in a feeding frenzy. A mugshot of Blake, looking pale and panicked, was splashed across every screen. The narrative was perfect. The successful, arrogant businessman, caught in a web of greed and violence. The story had everything: a missing victim, a ruthless affair, and a motive straight out of a B-movie. They were calling it the Sharpsburg Slasher or something equally ridiculous, and I had to hand it to them. The name was catchy. They were making a villain out of him, a monster, and I was the ghost, the victim who wasn't really a victim, watching it all from a safe distance. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a TV show where I was both the star and the audience. They had the gun, they had the fingerprints, and they had a motive that, on the surface, looked airtight. Blake's legal team, I imagined, was in a full-blown panic. The evidence I'd left for them was meticulously placed, each piece a carefully selected domino, and the entire chain was now falling, one after another. He would try to pin it on Lisa, and she would try to pin it on him. A delicious cycle of betrayal, all fueled by the very thing that had brought them together in the first place: their mutual contempt for me. The symbolic image of all this was a spider web, a beautiful but deadly creation. I was the spider, hidden in the shadows, and they were the flies, trapped and struggling. The more they fought, the more entangled they would become, and the more they lied to save themselves, the more they would convince the world of their guilt. The truth was now a distant echo, a faint whisper in the wind. The story was now everything, and the story said they were guilty. I knew the next step. The police would question Lisa, and she would crumble under pressure. Not because she was weak, but because she was used to having a safety net. She was used to my presence, my quiet strength, and my ability to fix things. But I wasn't there to fix it this time, and as she looked into the cold eyes of the detectives, she would realize that she was on her own, and that, I thought with a cruel smile, was the real punishment. Lisa's first call, of course, was to her lawyer, Basil Smith, a family friend and the kind of guy who looked like he spent his weekends at the yacht club. He was probably the only person she could trust right now. But even he couldn't see the whole picture. He would advise her to stay calm, to not talk to the police without him present. He'd probably tell her that they had nothing on her. But he'd be wrong. I'd left a trail of breadcrumbs for him, too. A digital paper trail that would lead him to Blake, and then a series of dead ends that would frustrate him to no end. The police would bring her in for questioning. It wouldn't be an arrest, not yet, just a routine interview. But they'd put her in a room, under a bright, unforgiving light, and they'd ask the questions I'd been waiting for them to ask. They'd show her the picture of the gun, the financial records, the texts. They'd ask about her relationship with Blake, about their trips, their business meetings. And she would crack. Not all at once, but slowly, like a hairline fracture in a marble statue. She'd start with a few small lies, then a few more, until the whole thing came crashing down. I could almost hear her voice, a high-pitched, desperate whine, as she tried to explain away the evidence. And I knew exactly what she'd say. She'd say Blake was a scoundrel, a manipulator, that he'd tricked her into doing his bidding. She'd say that I was a controlling, paranoid jerk, all of which was probably true, in a way. But none of it mattered. The story had already been written, and her role in it was that of a co-conspirator. The truth was now a minor detail, a footnote in a much bigger, more exciting story. The police would let her go, but with a warning. They'd tell her to stay in town, not to talk to anyone, and to prepare for the grand jury. And she'd go back to the house I'd left to rot, and she would realize with a sickening clarity that she had nothing left. Her reputation was in tatters, her marriage was a lie, and her lover was a prime suspect in my murder. And that, I thought, with a deep, satisfying breath, was the final punchline. The days turned into a blur. I was just a ghost in the machine, a silent observer watching the chaos I'd unleashed. Lisa and Blake, now public pariahs, were being torn apart by the media. The story was everywhere, and it was a real circus. The morning talk shows debated their guilt. The tabloids published their private messages, and social media was a cesspool of judgment and speculation. My carefully constructed story was now the truth, and no one, not even Lisa's fancy lawyer, could change the narrative. I felt a strange sense of emptiness. The revenge, the satisfaction, it was all there, a bitter, satisfying meal I was savoring alone. But there was no one to share it with. No one to give a high five to, no one to say, "I told you so." It was just me and the silence, the same quiet that had greeted me when I came home that first Saturday. The only difference was, this time, I was the one who was gone. The most delicious part was watching them turn on each other. The last time I'd checked the news, Blake had started to blame Lisa, saying she was the one who had planned it all. He claimed he was just a patsy, a pawn in her game. Lisa, in a rare moment of public speaking, had gone on a local news channel to deny everything and accuse him of lying. The two lovebirds were now in a desperate public fight for their freedom, and it was a sight to behold. A true bummer for them, but for me, pure entertainment. The truth was, they were both equally guilty. They had both betrayed me, and they were both deserving of the punishment I had dished out. The only thing that made me different from them was that I had a plan, a flawless, airtight, almost too perfect plan, and they, in their arrogance and stupidity, had walked right into it. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was getting ready to leave the motel, to move on to the next phase of my new life. The old one was in the rearview mirror, a small, blurry image of a man I no longer recognized. The car was packed, the bag was on my shoulder. I was about to walk out the door when my phone, the burner I'd used to communicate with the world, buzzed with an incoming text message. A single, short, chilling message. It was from an anonymous number, and it simply said, "We need to talk." My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, panicked thud. We need to talk. The words were so simple, so plain, and yet they hit me like a sledgehammer. It wasn't Lisa, I was sure of it. She was too busy fighting for her life to send a cryptic text message to a burner phone. And it wasn't Blake. That jerk was probably too busy crying into his lawyer's sleeve to even think about me. It had to be someone else. Someone who knew. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the weight of the past 2 weeks settle on my shoulders. I'd been so sure, so convinced that my plan was flawless. I thought I was the one pulling the strings. But maybe, just maybe, I'd been a puppet all along. The air in the tiny motel room suddenly felt heavy, thick with the scent of stale coffee and my own rising dread. I held the phone in my hand, staring at the message as if it held the secrets of the universe. I had two choices: ignore it and risk the whole thing falling apart, or answer it and face the unknown. I typed a single word: "Who?" The reply came almost instantly: "The one who knows you're not dead, Mark." And there it was. The game had just changed, and I was no longer in control. My meticulously constructed house of cards, the masterpiece of misdirection I'd spent months building, was now on the brink of collapse. The thought of it was both horrifying and strangely exhilarating. It was the moment every good thriller needs, the moment when the hero realizes he's in over his head. I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my hands tremble. I had to know who this was. I had to get a handle on the situation, to find out how they knew and what they wanted. I texted back, "What do you want?" A minute later the reply came, "I want to hear your story, the real one." The bar was a quiet, dimly lit place in downtown Baltimore, exactly the kind of spot where deals get made and secrets get traded. A low bluesy tune was playing on the jukebox, and the air smelled of stale beer and desperation. I was sitting in a booth, watching the entrance, my heart still a jackhammer in my chest. I had no idea who I was waiting for. A cop? A private investigator? Maybe a friend of Lisa's? All I knew was that my perfect plan was no longer perfect. The game had just been leveled, and I was about to find out who was on the other side. The door opened, and a woman walked in. She was tall, with fiery red hair and a sharp, intelligent face. She looked around, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. She gave a little knowing smile, the kind that says, "I've got you." It was Sarah, my Zoom therapist, the woman I had been spilling all my secrets to for the past 6 months from the comfort of my home office, the one who had told me, "Mark, you are a master strategist," the woman I had confided in about every detail of my plan, every piece of evidence I had planted, every lie I had told. She sat down across from me, her eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and something else I couldn't quite place. "You're a legend, Mark," she said, her voice a low purr. "The police, the media, they're all over the place. They're still trying to figure out how 2 people could have done this." "How did you know?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I had meticulously planned every detail, every angle, and the one person I had trusted with my secrets was the one person who had found me. "Oh, Mark," she said, shaking her head, "you're not the first man to come to me with a wife problem, but you are the first to tell me your entire plot, to frame them for your murder. It was all there, in your sessions, the details, the logic, the sheer elegance of it all. I just had to piece it together." And then came the final twist, the one I never saw coming. She slid a small sealed envelope across the table. "Here you go," she said with a nonchalant shrug. "Your payment for a job well done." I stared at the envelope, confused. What is this?" I asked. "It's a check," she said, her eyes fixed on mine. "From Blake. It seems he and I have been working together for a while now, and he had a feeling you would eventually come to me. He wanted to make sure you got paid for all your hard work." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000 made out to Mark Evans. And that was it, The entire game, the entire plan, the meticulous framing, the fabricated evidence, the months of emotional torture, it had all been just another one of their little games. They hadn't betrayed me. They'd been playing me all along. The ultimate revenge wasn't getting caught. It was realizing I had been the one who was truly played. The universe, it seemed, had a much darker sense of humor than I did.